So I'm going to start my talk about empathy to ask you to have a little bit of empathy for me today. I have been sick in my hotel room the entire conference. So I'm going to have to rely heavily on my notes today because my brain is just not functioning, so I apologize. So I'm Sarah Olson. I'm an iOS developer for Trello, now part of Atlassian, and I'm the director of Women Who Code Twin Cities. We're all at a mobile conference here, so I'm going to assume that we're all interested in creating amazing mobile apps, that we're interested in creating apps that people really love. In October of last year, I joined Trello, and I was super excited because it is an app that I have used and loved for years. And I finally get to work on an app that people get really excited about. We have a really strong community and fan base. People who use Trello seem to love it just as much as I do. So with that in mind, I've thought a lot about how do we create apps that people love? And my answer to that question is, well, there's many reasons, but I'd like to suggest mainly through empathy. So empathy is the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing from within that other person's frame of reference. It's putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So let's break that down a little bit further. Cognitive empathy is when you take someone else's perspective, so you know how they might be feeling or what they might be thinking. But emotional empathy takes it one step forward, where you actually feel something along with them. And when I think about this, I think of maybe like a funeral, where you go and you didn't really know the person, but you feel the grief along with everyone else. Compassionate empathy or empathic concern is going even further, saying, I not only understand how you feel, and I feel it with you, but I feel compelled to help you. And tactical or strategic empathy is now using that empathy and that feeling that you want to help people to actually reach your goals. Technologists, we're problem solvers. And I have to admit that when I'm feeling empathy for someone, I feel moved to help them. It's in my nature, and I'm guessing maybe it's in your nature too. And I would like everyone in tech to think of themselves as a tactical empath, someone who uses empathy to achieve their goals. So in 1979, Patricia Moore was a 26-year-old designer who wanted to understand the needs of elderly people better. So she actually dressed up as an 85-year-old woman. And she put in clouded contacts, and she plugged up her ears, and she had braces and bandages to try and mimic what someone who has a lot of physical limitations, how they kind of navigate the world. So for years, she traveled around North America in her disguise and tried to figure out how elderly people navigate everyday obstacles. And she's credited as the creator of inclusive and universal design and the empathic model. She said, empathy is a constant awareness of the fact that your concerns are not everyone's concerns, and your needs are not everyone's needs, and that some compromise has to be achieved moment by moment. I don't think empathy is charity. I don't think empathy is self-sacrifice. I don't think empathy is prescriptive. I think empathy is an ever-evolving way of living as fully as possible because it's pushing your envelope and pushing you into new experiences that you might not expect or appreciate until you're given the opportunity. But as developers, why should we care about empathy? If we want our users to love our app, what we're saying is we're concerned with their emotions. And we want to inspire a particular emotion for those who are using our app. So in order to do that, we need to think about how does our app currently make them feel, and what can we do to make them feel better about it? How can we improve our user experience? We can use all that information to create a positive change, to create love for our app or more love. Empathy can help us with that, to understand our users' perspectives and their emotional reactions in a tactical or strategic manner. There's a lot of talk about the lack of ethics in technology today, balancing user privacy with your features. And as developers, we need to think about the implications of our choices, how those choices will have an effect on our users and the world at large. And I think empathy is key to that. Novelist Ian McEwan said, "Imagining what it's like to be someone other than yourself is at the core of our humanity. It is the essence of compassion, and it is the beginning of morality." So how do we put empathy into practice? These are the steps that I've come up with for practicing empathy, and as a Minnesotan, we have a phrase called oofda, which is kind of like, wow. So like, oofda, look at the size of this room. Like, that's my Fargo impersonation. If you've seen the show, you might have heard this phrase. So my oofda is understand, feel, think, act. So we start by seeking to understand someone's perspective, feeling their emotions along with them, brainstorming ways that we can make a difference, and then acting to provide a positive change. Thinking about practicing empathy, I'm struck by the similarities to technology in general, because when you think about it, technology is all about empathy. Technology and empathy both are about finding ways to improve lives. With technology, we automate menial tasks. We make it simpler or easier to perform complex tasks. We gather and store data so we can make better informed decisions. It's all about making lives better, just like empathy. And if I go through my list of steps to practice empathy, I think we can use those same steps to alleviate our users' problems in technology. We seek to understand their problems, we feel their frustration or their excitement along with them, we brainstorm solutions, and we implement ones that will provide a positive impact. But how often do we actually try to feel our users' pain, the emotions that they might be feeling? And when we do feel it, how much more motivated are we to actually solve their problems? Have you ever fixed like a tiny little bug just because it was so frustrating that you personally just wanted to get it done? It might have not have had the biggest impact, but it influenced your emotions. Even though empathy seems to be a topic that I've seen more often in the media and at conferences lately, it's not something that's a new concern. Empathy is a natural human trait. Even babies display signs of empathy. But there's a lot of research that shows Americans and people from many other countries are currently experiencing an empathy deficit. We're less empathetic than we've ever been. A study conducted at the University of Michigan Institute for Social Research found that college students today are 40% less empathetic than they were in 1979. With the steepest decline coming in the last 10 years. They found that students were more likely to admit that other people's problems generally didn't disturb them. From this study, they concluded that about a decade ago, scores in two key areas of empathy began to decline drastically. One was with cognitive empathy, which is the ability to think about how someone might feel and take their perspective into account. But the other finding was especially troubling. Empathic concern, the ability to exhibit an emotional response to someone else's distress, fell more than any other aspect of empathy. It dropped 48% in the last 30 years. People who score high in empathic concern are more likely to donate to charity, to volunteer, or simply just let someone else ahead of them in line. Put simply, they care about others. Further research found that 1 in 10 Americans exhibit narcissistic personality traits that limit their interest in the lives of others. Many people think technology is partially to blame for this decline. We're more connected than we've ever been before, but we also have tighter social circles. We tend to socialize within our own little social media bubbles and rarely interact with people from other groups. Barack Obama brought up empathy as a concern in his 2006 Northwestern University commencement speech. He said, "There's a lot of talk in this country about the federal deficit, but I think we should talk more about our empathy deficit, the ability to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, to see the world through those who are different from us, the child who's hungry, the laid-off steelworker, the immigrant woman cleaning your dorm room. As you go on in life, cultivating this quality of empathy will become harder, not easier. There's no community service requirement in the real world, no one forcing you to care. You'll be free to live in neighborhoods with people who are exactly like yourself, and send your kids to the same schools, and narrow your concerns to what's going on in your own little circle. Not only that, we live in a culture that discourages empathy, a culture that too often tells us our principal goal in life is to be rich, thin, young, famous, safe, and entertained. A culture with those in power too often encourage these selfish impulses. In tech, I think we also focus too often on selfish impulses. We focus more on financial and sales data than happiness and engagement, or become feature factories that disregard the importance of things like continuous improvement and user experience. And that is the place where love comes in, users having a wonderful experience using your app. So how do we create that love and become better at empathy? Now, we're not going to conferences to learn how to be better at empathy, though you're here today learning about it. And it's a human trait, and babies know how to do it, but it's something that we can actually grow stronger at when we practice and we learn how to really use it. We need to practice the steps: understand, feel, think, act. I want to point out some of the cool new projects that I've seen around empathic technology coming out. So with the rapid development of sensor technology and machine vision, we can now measure biosignals related to human emotions in real time, in real environments. Take customer experience. We don't need to ask about what a service felt like. We can see it for ourselves. So Simpulse is a new technology. It's a device that lets doctors or anyone else feel patients' Parkinson's symptoms. With Simpulse, a patient with Parkinson's wears an armband that records their tremors and involuntary movements. Another person wearing the receiving armband can then feel those same tremors that the patient is currently experiencing. It creates an empathy circuit where you can literally feel the disruption and frustration a patient feels when trying to navigate their daily lives, when they're tying their shoes, when they're trying to drink from a glass of water, using a phone, buttoning their clothes. Multiple studies have found that patients of empathetic doctors fare better in the treatment of diseases from diabetes to depression. When doctors don't empathize, patients suffer. Designer Anouk Wipprecht created a dress that responds to people invading the wearer's personal space. It uses wireless biometric signals to monitor the stress levels in the wearer's body and reacts based on how cautiously or assertively someone approaches it. The animatronic arachnid limbs that jab or undulate are driven by computer and sensor technologies that allow autonomous behavior, but are also assistive and adaptive to the owner's emotions and desires. She says that when approached at an aggressive pace, the system answers in territorial attack mode. But when you walk up to the dress in a more cautious, friendly, symbiotic way, you can almost get the dress to invite you closer, as if to dance with you. The Portals Project is an art installation by Amar Bakshi, a Yale Law graduate and former special assistant to the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. In his project, shipping containers are painted gold and placed in 2 locations around the world. The containers are equipped with video conferencing equipment that allows participants to communicate while thousands of miles apart. Participants sign up to connect to strangers in the other portal, not knowing anything about who they are or where they are. For 20 minutes, they connect with an absolute stranger in a private conversation with no real purpose other than to make a new connection. The creator said, "I discovered that some of the most important conversations were ones that I had with a stranger during a bus ride from one place to another, when there was no iPhone, nothing to look at, just to pass the time. I had some of the deepest moments of my life at that time. The Machine to Be Another is a VR-based performance art piece that's traveled around the world. Participants wear an Oculus Rift that swaps perception with a performer who mirrors their actions. They can open their eyes and actually see someone else's face in the mirror. They can hear spoken thoughts of the performer through headphones as they navigate the world with someone else's eyes. Even though this is a technology-based solution, the creator had some concerns about focusing solely on empathic technology. We don't need technology to feel empathy, Bertrand said. The question is, what would the world be like if we could better understand each other? I think communication is the key to empathy. Now, these projects are all really cool and fantastic, but not everyone can quit their day jobs to create a new startup based on empathic technology. So how can we use empathy in our daily lives in our current jobs? It doesn't have to be a huge project or feature to make an impact. Small steps taken together can create a movement. Accessibility is an issue that we should all care about. Even though it may only focus on a subset of our users, it can create a huge benefit to those who would otherwise be unable to use our apps. At Trello, one of the first features I was able to develop was to add colorblind mode to our iOS application. It basically adds a pattern to our labels so you can differentiate them more easily. It was something we already had on the web, but we hadn't had time to put into our app yet. Even though users who are not colorblind appreciated the change because it improved their experience in using labels in our app. So not only did we help our colorblind users, we added a feature that made our app easier to use for everyone. Jane Shi is a director of our Women Who Code network in Taipei. And she formed a team to create an Alexa app that helps blind massage therapists monitor and schedule their sessions. In Taipei, over 70% of blind people work in the massage industry. There's a huge potential for accessibility improvements to assist them in their jobs and daily lives. Think about ways that you could add more accessibility to your own app. Users don't just want features, they want to have fun while they use your app. I was really excited to work on Trello's recent integration with Unsplash that allows users to change their board background images with Unsplash's amazing library of photos for free. We knew this was a feature that our users were going to love because they love customizing their boards, and what better way to do that than with these gorgeous images? We tested the idea out first in a beta group and received some wonderful feedback, and we were excited when the general public was just as happy as we were. However, while testing, we noticed that the UX could really use some improvements. In the iOS app, it took 4 clicks to go through all the menus to change your board background. So if you wanted to try out a few different photos, it was actually quite cumbersome to do so. Hopefully we can speed that up in a future release. But it brings me to the importance of user experience. Anyone who's had an app on the App Store knows that iOS users in particular can be very fickle. A small UX annoyance can generate some poor ratings or actually have users completely stop using your application. We need to make sure that we're constantly balancing usability with other factors and features. Snapchat is an app that comes to mind when I think about UX concerns. My kids adore Snapchat for the filters alone. It's their absolute favorite app. They're 3 and 7, and they've been masters at navigating their iPads since they were 1.5 years. But they still have problems navigating Snapchat's UI. The lack of menus make it really easy to navigate through the app once you know what you're doing, but the drawback is trying to remember where they all are. We have to think about trying to balance usability and ease of use with things like navigating through quicker, because you're going to exclude some users through your choices. My kiddos would really appreciate a much simpler navigation UI, FYI. I'd like to leave you with some key concepts that I've found help guide me through my work and in my life. Code is language. We communicate with a computer for a living. Technology is all about communication, and so is empathy. So spend as much time learning about communication and improving your communication skills as you do learning technical skills. I think it's that important. Also, make sure you learn how to adapt your communication style to how you will connect best to each person or group you're communicating with. Documentation should be different than explaining your code to your technical lead, and it should be different than how you would explain your code to a non-technical end client. Communication requires adjusting your style to fit the receiver. It's easier to have empathy for someone when you're face-to-face, when you can see their emotional reaction and their body language. Remember that anonymity can be dangerous. It's easy to forget the humanity of people on the receiving end of your social media posts. If you haven't seen the video of men reading offensive tweets that were sent to female sportscasters, I highly recommend it. It's really moving. It's hard to be mean to someone in person. And remember that when you post online, if you wouldn't say it to their face, why would you write it in public? People have bad days. We don't know what their struggles are. Try to give them the benefit of the doubt. Assume positive intent. This is especially important for managers. You don't always know what your employees are going through. Seek to understand before you assume. Ask what you can do to help before assuming that your employees are being lazy or unproductive on purpose. This is a step for practicing empathy, but it's important enough that I wanted to reiterate it. Understanding someone else's point of view will help you find common ground. It will help you see their perspective, which is so important to empathy. But this works in all aspects of software development. Seek to understand your users, your clients, your designers, your developers, your QA team, your deployment process. As a technologist, you can never stop learning. Continue seeking. I think this is something that is not really talked about enough, and I feel it's really important. We should always strive to treat others with respect. We should hire for respect, and we should be willing to fire people who are disrespectful. We can disagree, and we should at times, but we can do so respectfully. One of my favorite quotes about respect is from Neil Gaiman, who's an author. And he had a wonderful post on his Tumblr that I end up sharing often because I still hear so much backlash against PC culture. And I love his response to it. Now, he said, I was reading a book yesterday which included the phrase, "in these days of political correctness," talking about no longer making jokes that denigrated people for their culture or the color of their skin. And I thought that's not actually anything to do with political correctness, that's just treating other people with respect, which made me oddly happy. I started imagining a world in which we replaced the phrase politically correct wherever we could with treating other people with respect, and it made me smile. You should try it. It's particularly enlightening. I know what you're thinking now. You're thinking, oh my God, that's treating with other people with respect gone mad. That sounds a little silly when you say it that way, doesn't it? So I encourage you all to think about ways that you can use empathy towards others in your job. How can you be more empathetic towards your other team members when you're doing pull requests? Or your future teammates when you're writing documentation for some complex code that you all currently understand, but maybe someone in the future wouldn't? How can you be more empathetic to your manager? Maybe they have a technical background and this is their first time managing. How can you help them learn how to do their job better, maybe? To your subordinates who might be having a really bad day and you don't know what's going on in their personal lives, and you really shouldn't ask, but you could be more empathetic towards them. Be more empathetic towards your users and your potential users through accessibility. Empathy towards your mentees, potential job candidates. Think about all the people you interact with on a daily basis and where you could provide more empathy towards them. As technologists, we're great at using our clever brain. Let's get better at putting our human heart into our work as well. Empathy is really important. Only when our clever brain and our human heart work together in harmony can we achieve our true potential. Thank you.